Let's begin the Fog of War 2.0 tutorial. First, I've prepared an empty project, and the Unreal Engine version is 5.4. Next, I'll download the top-down content pack to use for this tutorial. We'll be implementing the system within this project. The first thing to do is to make sure the Fog of War plugin is enabled in the Plugins window. Then find the Fog of War plugin inside the Engine's Plugins folder. Since I placed the plugin inside the project itself, I'll locate it within the project folder. Once you find it, you'll see three folders: Blueprints, Showcase, and Source. For now, we only need to open the Blueprints folder. Inside, you'll find two classes, FOW Grid Manager and FOW Manager. Let's start by looking at the Grid Manager. Drag the Grid Manager into your map. The Grid Manager's job is to divide the map into a grid, store that data, and prepare it for the Fog of War system. If you check the Details panel, you'll see two sections, Options and Debug. In the Options section, you can define the range the Fog of War will cover. Adjust this to match your map size. I'll set it to 2000 for width and 800 for height, just to be safe. Next is cell size, but before adjusting that, let's turn on the Show All Cell option in the Debug section. When enabled, this lets you preview how the grid will appear in your map. Right now, everything on the ground appears red. That's because the Grid Manager hasn't yet gathered any data from the terrain actors, so nothing is recognized. To make it recognize the terrain, simply add a component to the actor. Add a Vision Source component, and in its options, set the vision type. Since this actor is a floor, set it to floor. Then go back to the Grid Manager, toggle the option off and back on, and you'll see that it now properly recognizes the floor actors. The green areas represent what the player can see, while the red areas are parts the player cannot see, even when close. Now add Vision Source components to the walls as well and set their type to blocker. Next, let's talk about cell size. If you look at one of the walls, you'll notice that the grid and the actor don't align perfectly. When cell size is smaller, the grid becomes more detailed and the Fog of War looks sharper, but performance is affected accordingly. So it's best to choose a cell size that fits your project's balance between performance and quality. That's all for the Grid Manager setup. Now, let's move on to setting up the FOW Manager. Drag the manager into the map and hit play. You'll see that the screen is completely black. That's because there's no actor with vision yet. Let's fix that by adding a Vision Source component to the top-down character. In Vision Type, select Revealer. This will reveal the range and angle settings. Adjust them to match your desired field of view. Now, if you play again, you'll see that the Fog of War works properly. Since the vision is still too narrow, let's widen it a bit. Okay. Now let's take a closer look at the detailed options. First, the update rate. This setting controls how often the Fog of War updates per second. If you set it to the minimum, you set it to the maximum, it becomes smooth. But smoother isn't always better. Adjust it to match the style of your project. Next, there are the unexplored color and explored color options. The fog of war divides areas into 3 states: never visited, previously visited, and currently visible. Each state uses a different brightness level. If you set the unexplored color to something other than black, you'll get a style similar to AOS or RTS games, where the entire map is visible, but unit vision areas are highlighted in brighter tones. Next is the upscale factor. This is for users who want to use a separate texture resolution for the fog of war. Then we have the fog blur strength option. This controls the intensity of the blur applied to vision edges. If you lower it, you'll get sharp, blocky edges. This can be useful if you're aiming for a pixel art or retro visual style. For example, if you set both update rate and blur strength to the minimum, you can create a pixelated, choppy visual effect. On the other hand, if you set the blur strength to maximum, the vision edges become much smoother. When the blur is too high, the vision becomes overly rounded. In that case, it's better to set the vision angle to 360 degrees for a more natural look. If it's not 360 degrees, I recommend keeping blur strength around 5 at most. Next, before explaining max height step, let's add vision source components to other actors in the map. Actors that the player can stand on should be set to floor. Cylinders that the player can't climb and that don't move should be set to blocker. And these cubes, since I want them to block the player's sight, should also be blockers. Since they are physically movable, we'll set them to movable blocker instead. When you do this, the cubes will block the player's vision by default. But if you move them, the blocking area will dynamically update. Blockers are used for static objects that never move and that the player cannot stand on. Next is floor. This is where max height step comes into play. If the height difference between the player and the floor exceeds max height step, the player's vision will be blocked. The last option is hidden. Actors set to hidden will disappear when they move out of the vision range of actors set as revealers. This setting is typically used for enemy players or neutral monsters. Finally, under Debug, if you enable Revealer Sight, you can visualize the vision ranges of all actors with sight. Lastly, if you notice that an actor's vision doesn't match its actual position, check your anti-aliasing settings. Make sure you're using TAA or TSR. This plugin does not work properly with FXAA or MSAA. And that concludes the Fog of War plugin tutorial.